Hi everyone. In this video, we'll learn about XML HttpRequest. So today we'll learn how to create and use XML HttpRequest in JavaScript. We'll learn how to fetch JSON data from a remote API. And we'll also learn how to handle any errors that might occur during the process. Let's get started. So a few words about XML HttpRequest. It's a special class in JavaScript that allows us to create and send HTTP requests to servers and get information from them. It's quite easy to use, and let me show you right now. Let me show you the API that we are going to use. We're going to use OpenWeatherMap API. This is an API that gives you a weather forecast, and you can also get the current weather in your city. This is a free API, so this is but you need to log in and register to use it. I'm already registered and I already have an account, so I just sign in. When you sign in, you should first of all click on API, and this is the API documentation. There's a lot of information that you can get using this API. You can get the current weather data, you can get hourly forecast, you can get 16-day forecast, and many more things. But for me, I think it's interesting to get the current weather data. So I will use the first one, and I'll click on API doc to just read the documentation. So in this documentation, I can see on the right, there are a few topics, there are a few things that we can get. So we can call to get the weather data for one location, and we can also get the weather data for several cities. I think one location is enough for this tutorial. So let me check this out in the documentation, how to get a weather location for a weather data for one location. So this is the URL. I can see this is the API call, and I can also see two example API calls. Let's check the URL here. So this is the api.openweathermap.org. And then there's some path, weather, and then you need to input a city name into the URL and something called app ID. Now, because you need to register in order to use an API, you will have your own API key, which you will generate, and you have to use your API key every time for every request you're doing to the server. This is a way for OpenWeatherMap to identify you as a user. And this is important for them because there are users who pay money to get maybe premium services, and they need to know who is paying and who is a free user. So let's create a new API key. For me, you have to sign in, and you click on your account name to go to your profile. Then you click on API keys. And then you can create a key here. You just give a name to your key, for example, test, and click on generate. Now you can see a test key. Now, one thing that I want to mention is you should handle those API keys just like passwords. There's a secret and no one should know except you. Why is that? This is because if I know your API token, I can just use this to have a request on your behalf. And so this is really important for you to keep it a secret. So don't post it in Slack. Don't commit it to GitHub. I see a lot of people just commit their tokens to GitHub, and this is bad because now all the world can read your secret token. There you go. So I already have HackYourFuture token, so I'll use this one. And when you finish using the token, or maybe if your token exposed, you can always delete it and it will no longer work. Okay. So now let's go back to the weather API. API doc. And as you can see, we're going to use this URL here. But before that, let's have some code available, and I'll show you how to use the XML HttpRequest. So first of all, we're going to create a new HTML file here. I'm going to create it index.html, and also how to complete some headers, and I'll just call it weather app, because why not? I'll also create a script tag, Yes. And also, let's create the JavaScript. All right. So I have my HTML. I have my JavaScript. In JavaScript, I'll just temporarily paste my token just for easy to use, because I don't want it to go away. But don't forget, don't send it, or then don't save your token or send it to other people. Okay, so this is the URL that we're going to use. We can copy the URL for our application. There are also two sample URLs that we can try out. I'll click it. Then I can see the actual response that we get. So this is important because then we can investigate how can we use this data. This is the JSON structure, so we can check out how can we get the information about the weather and about something like wind or clouds. Let's go back to the JavaScript and start coding. To create a new XML Httprequest, all you need to do is to define a new constant. I will call it XHR because this is abbreviation for XML Httprequest. And this is just short, and you'll see this abbreviation everywhere. And then you use the keyword new and then XML Httprequest. And that's it. This is how can we create a new XML Httprequest object. Now let's send a request, shall we? Also use a const URL just to save the URL here. And I'll also use backticks. No, I will not use backticks. I'll just use quotes. And this is the URL that we have. Don't forget to add the HTTP, otherwise it will not work. This is important. So we have two parameters here. We have the city name. I'll call it Amsterdam. And then we have the input, the API key. I'll copy the key from here to here. Now I can delete this. And I have my URL. We can even test it by copy the full URL, open a new browser tab, paste it. And there we go. We got information from my key. So this works. Let's send a request. In order to send a request, we need to, first of all, use xhr.open. Open will initialize a new request, and it takes two parameters. The first one is the HTTP method that we need. Since here we're just getting information, you will just use get. A lot of times you can just read the information on the documentation of the API to determine if you need get, post, delete, or something else. Here it's quite simple, we're just getting information. So this is a HTTP get method. Next, the second parameter is the URL, which we already have prepared. After we open the XHR, we will send the XHR. So this will actually send the request to the remote server. And it takes a body as a parameter, so you can send something back, something to the server. In our case, we don't really send anything, we're just doing a GET request, which is most of the time without anybody. So this will be empty. Now, important thing to know is that when you use send, you don't get the result immediately. This is because XML Httprequest works asynchronously, and you learned about synchronous versus asynchronous programming in the previous model. So we will not get the answer right away. Because of that, we should, before we send the request, define some callback function that will get back, the callback function will get called once the data has arrived. So to do this, we're just calling xhr.onload, and we'll pass it the function. And here we can console.log data has arrived, or maybe even better, just onload. All right. Another way, by the way, to use this, instead of onload, you can also add event listener, which is called load, and also you can put here the function. This one is the same like onload. Just note that if you're using add event listener, you don't need the on prefix, so it's just load. You can use either, it doesn't matter. I like the first option, so I'll just use the on load like this. So this is it. This is how you use basic XML HTTP requests. So let's check out and try to run this script. I'll open the code in Chrome and let's investigate the network tab or maybe the console. I'll refresh the page and we already see the onload happens really quickly. Now I don't really know what happened, so I might go to the network tab to see if there are any HTTP requests sent. And I can already see 3 requests. The first one is index.html. Yeah, that's the loading of the first page, and the second is script. But the third one, this is actually what we sent. And you can know this because if you can see the type here is XHR. And we can even filter to show only XHR if XHR network requests. And this is very handy because sometimes when you go to a website, you see a lot of images, videos, fonts, CSS, they're being loaded, and sometimes you just want to filter out. So we can see that we already got a status 200, which is amazing because we got 200 OK. We got the headers and everything. And we also got the response, and there we go. We got the response in the network tab. So how do we actually read the response? Reading the response, to read the response, you just use console log and use xhr.response text. And this will use the response text. And let's refresh to see. And yes, just like expected, we now printing to console the whole JSON response. So now we can remove this. And now we can actually get the weather information from this API really easily in the 10 lines of code. So now I want you to have an exercise. And this is the exercise that I want you to do. Let me maybe do like something like this. Exercise. You need to first create index.html and script.js files. Of course, you can name it whatever you like. And then I want you to just mimic the same that I did. I want you to go and create new XML HTTP request. It's lowercase. And send API request. This is so far the same, just send API request to open weather map. And the third one, this is a new one that I didn't do. I want you to put everything in a function. I want you to put the whole call in a function, and then I want you to create a button. Create a button. When I click on the button, it will call the function. Right? Let's call the function maybe something like get weather. So it will call get weather. This is what I want you to do. Maybe prefix, you need to register and generate API token in open weather map. I don't want to say this. So you register and then you mimic just like I did. You can also rewind the video if you want, if you forget. And after that, after you create a new XML HTTP request, I want you to put everything into one function. And I want you to create a button, and when I click on the button, it will just call the weather and create a new HTTP request. So this time, I'm showing you both the exercise and the sample code I have. The URL is a bit trimmed, but you can get it from the documentation of the API. You just go to Open Weather Map. to get the documentation. So now pause the video. Please do the exercise. Please rewind the video if you have any unclear information. And I will show you the solution in a few seconds. All right, so I hope that you did the exercise and it went well. So let me show you the solution of the exercise. Since I have already registered and created the API token, I'll just continue from the fourth and I'll do the fourth and the fifth step. So let's create a function. Like I said, get weather. And now I'll simply put everything inside of this function. So now we have the function get weather. Let's create a button inside our HTML page. Button ID, my button. So, and we'll call it get weather. I will save this. And here in JavaScript, I will just get the element by ID, my button, add event listener. No, you don't have to do this. You can also do on click, right? Function, and I will just call get weather. Let's check if it works. I will refresh the page, and we have an error. Property null. Oh yes, this is because my button is not created yet. So I can what I can do? I can do document.onload and put this inside. So this event will happen only when the document finishes loading, which means the button is already created. And after that, I'll just add this event. So let's refresh to see if it works. We have the button here, get weather. When I click on the button, nothing happens because I messed up. So let's see what happens. Let's double check that everything is defined. Maybe it's not document, it's window onload. Let's try window.onload. I think the event didn't work. Yeah, there you go. So it's window.onload, and that was my mistake. Okay, so this is one way to do this. Let's recap what we did. I created a function. I called it getWeather. I put the whole logic inside of this method, and then I just assigned an event to my button to get the weather. So now that we have the data, it's actually very useful and very interesting if we could get only the temperature and not this really long, messy and strange string that we got. What if I want just the number? I just want just the data. We'll start doing something called parsing. So we'll start parsing the JSON. So in this function, we already have the text, and the response text is a string. This is a string of the JSON. This is string of a JSON, and we need to convert it. We need to convert it to an object, and to do this, we'll call a special function called JSON.parse. JSON.parse takes as a parameter a string, and it returns a JavaScript object. Now, what I'll do, I'll call JSON parse under XHR response text, and I will maybe save it into object like weather data, and let's console log it. Let's see what has changed since the last one. So once again, I used JSON parse on the response text, and I'm logging the information. So let's check out what happens now. When I click get weather, now instead of a string, you can see we're actually getting a real JSON. And since this JSON can easily translate into a JavaScript object, we can now use it as a JavaScript object really easily. And now I want to get the weather. This is my goal. And as you can see, when I open the object, I see there are a few properties here. And one of them, I can see it's main. And in main, we have temperature. So let's try to do this. So what if we try something like this? Weather dot main dot, let's go temp. So now, since it's an object, we can access to its properties, and these properties are here. So we can access name, we can access sys. For me, we'll access, for in our case, we'll access main. Let's try it out, and boom. You can see the temperature here. Something is still wrong because 280 is not really temperature. So what happens is that the OpenWeather API uses Kelvin as a temperature, as the default temperature units. Why? That's a really good question. So to do this, we'll go back to the documentation and I will check out how can we convert it to different units. And luckily here in the documentation, I can see units format section. I'll click on it and let's see what we get here. And yeah, I can see an example. So we can get a metric by appending this URL query string. It's units equals metric. So I will copy this and you can put it in the end. This is, by the way, this whole thing after the question mark, this is called query string. And this is something that's more like an options for the URL itself. So you can see the first option, and it's separated by key value, separated by equals. So the first key is Q and the value is Amsterdam. And then you have the ampersand to separate to the next parameter. Then the next parameter is app ID and my token. And the third parameter, again, ampersand. The third parameter is called units and the value is metric. Let's try again and we'll refresh the page. Get weather, 7.8 degrees. I think that's fine. Let's check Google just in case. I like fact checking. 8 degrees, that's fine, close enough for me. Cool, so now we have a small teeny tiny app that you can click a button, you can get a weather into the console. Let's try to get something else. Because, yeah, maybe I want to get also the broadcast or something like that. The forecast, sorry. I'll console log the whole data once again, because I want to see what I can still use. I can do this, or I can also go to the documentation or go to the samples. Maybe the samples is even better. So as you can see, I used main and then I went to temp. I can also do main.humidity. I can also, instead of main, use wind to get the wind and a lot of information. But I think I want to get something like this. This looks pretty nice to have like description for the weather. Let's get this. How do we get this? The description is inside of an object, and this object is a part of an array. As you can see, this is an array because there are square brackets. This array that's called weather. Okay, so since this is the weather, since this is an array, we should call this like this. Weather data dot weather dot, not dot, it's an array, so I need to get the first item, and then after getting first item, this is the one, then I want maybe to have a description. Once again, it's weather data. This is the object that we got, a weather in position 0 because we have an array here. Once again, this is an array with one item, so I'll just get the first one. And once we get the first item, this is the first item, I want the description. As you can see, this is why we use JSON, because it's so simple to translate from JSON to JavaScript objects. And you can simply get the information like very naturally. Let's refresh and check out. And yet again, as you can see, this is the weather, and this is the description, broken clouds. I wonder. This is a sample, so it's probably different. So broken clouds, that's the weather now in Amsterdam. Oh yeah, this is not London's weather, this is Amsterdam weather. That's true. That was my mistake before. Okay, so now we learned how to send an HTTP request. We learned how to get and parse the response to read some data from the JSON. I just want to show you something else. You can, for XHR, there is a really cool option that before you send the request, when you create it here, you can set the request type, the response type, into JSON. You can actually hint the XML Httprequest that you're probably gonna get JSON as a response. And because of that, you don't need this whole thing. You don't need to parse it anymore. What you can do instead, you can just remove this and just get xhr.response. This will already be this object. Let's try it out. If I click on button, yeah, I see I get the same result. Now, if I change it back to text, without parsing it, so there's missing JSON parse here, and I'll just use XHR response, I will get back a string and not a JSON. And I cannot do those kinds of actions like here and here with a string. And if I try to run it, I'll get an error. Could not read property temp of undefined. This is even undefined when you don't specify a response type. So this is a nice little trick that you can use. It saves you a little bit of code, and it also hints the XML Httprequest that you are going to get JSON. Time for our second exercise in this video. And the second exercise is going to be quite interesting. So first of all, I want to do the same process like I did. I want you to parse the response string using json.parse or using xhr.response type. You can use either. You can use even both to see just how they work. This is even better. So do the same like I did. Console log the current temperature and description like I did. This is the second thing that I want you to do. I want you to log exactly the same, and you can even play with this, maybe log something new. Let's do this. Console.log something new. Really want you to log something new from the JSON. Like if we go back to the JSON, maybe you can log like temp min, or maybe the wind or clouds, but something new, something that I didn't do. And lastly, I want you to show the current temperature on the page. So what I want you to do, I want you just to I want as a user, I just actually want to see the current temperature. So you probably need to create some sort of div or other element to show the temperature. It's up to you how to do this. Once again, pause the video, not now, just let me put this down so you can see the code here. It becomes quite large. This is the code, and this is the exercise. You can now pause the video, and I will show you the solution in a few seconds. All right, welcome back. I hope you managed to do this exercise successfully. If not, let me show you the solution. Once again, the first two things I will not do because it's already written here. So let's try to console log something new from the JSON. I'm going back to the JSON here that's open just to see what else I can maybe log just for fun. Maybe I want to log, let's log the wind speed, because why not? So the wind speed is here. This is inside of a speed property, inside of a wind object. And this one is, yeah, this is the same level like the other ones. So in this case, we just need to call wind.speed. Console.log. We already have the weather data as an object. I'll just use .wind.speed. And this should work. Let's try it out. I'm going to click my button. And yes, this is the wind currently in Amsterdam. Surprisingly, no wind at all. Yes. Next one, it's quite tricky. I hope you managed to do this. We want to actually show the current temperature to the user. So for that, I maybe want to create some, let's create a big h1 tag. Or maybe we'll call it div, not div, id, temp info. And this will be at the beginning just blank. After logging here, what I can do is call document dot get element by id, use this, and then I can, for example, change the inner text to the current weather. And I've already logged this to the current temperature, sorry. So I already logged this. So I can do backticks and I can do something really fancy. I can use the JavaScript string interpolation and maybe add my own message like today, or maybe now it is, and then temperature. And I can even maybe add this small 0 here, right? How do you do the degrees? Should be like this. So this is a really nice string that I can do. And but the important thing is just changing the element data. So let's try it out. So the first, of course, the h1 is invisible. When I click the get weather, there we go. So now we have the current weather. If I click again, it will refresh the weather, although the weather kind of stays the same. But if you will wait for maybe 1 hour and you click on get weather, it will definitely change and it will update this label. So this is how you show elements on the screen. And if you manage to do this by yourself, then well done. It's sometimes can be quite tricky to do this. Next one, I want to show you how to handle errors, because errors can happen. And if I go to this URL and I change the URL to something that is incorrect, we'll get an error and this whole unload function will just not work. So if I click now on get weather, you'll see already red message from Chrome that will tell you, well, your HTTP request failed. You can also go to the network tab to see this HTTP method failed. Notice here there's not even a response because the HTTP request could not even reach the server. This is what happened here. And since this has happened, unload never occurred and we never got this data. To handle error, there are two ways of error handling in XMLHttpRequest. The first error handling that we can that happens, I'll just clear up a little bit. Maybe I'll keep the temperature and the weather data like this. I'll clean a little bit the page so it will be nicer to read. There are two important ways to handle errors in XML HTTP request. The first one is to use the onError. So this onError callback will call when a network error occurred. And we can console log maybe something log, like, I think you can also use error here. I'm not sure. We'll check this out. You can console log that something went wrong, maybe add the error. Let's try it out. There we go. So you can see this printed something went wrong, and this is actually not the error. I think this is the whole XML Httprequest. Yes. So you can see this is in type error. I wonder how you can get the error. Yeah, so this is how you handle errors when a network error happens. Let's try to do something else. I'm going back and fixing my URL. And now what I will do, I will change, maybe instead of here, maybe I'll change to whether 123. Let's see what happens now. Okay, so first of all, I got 404 not found for the API, which it makes sense because I just changed the URL to whether 123, and this URL probably doesn't exist. And this is why the open weather map just returned me HTTP error 404. But notice what happened. I didn't get the onload message. If you remember, there is this something went wrong that I added here. And this was not printed. And how come? And the reason is this: from the XML Httprequest point of view, the request was successful. And the reason for this is that the XML Httprequest responsibility is just to take your request and send it to server and receive a response. And that's exactly what it did. It did send successfully the request to OpenWeatherMap. The URL is correct this time. However, OpenWeatherMap processed the request and he responded with HTTP error 404. But he did respond and we received the response, so the HTTP transaction was successful. And this is why we didn't get the onError. The onError occurs when something like you don't have internet connection, or maybe you are accessing the wrong domain, couldn't find the domain itself, or maybe if you change this to HTTP to something else, it will also not understand the link because AAAA is not a valid protocol. So this is onError, but onload, this is something that happens between you and the API. And to handle this, we should handle this in the onload, because the onload happens even when you get an HTTP 404. Let me just log onload to show you again. So we got an onload and we got an error because now we didn't get any response or any data, and we tried to parse the object and it's empty, so we got some errors here. So we're going to do this. We're going to check the status code. So we can use if xhr.status equal to 200. Then we can easily take those two lines and then we can show this. Otherwise, we can maybe show something like console log HTTP error, and maybe let's print the status. Okay, let's try it out. There you go, HTTP error 400. So this is good because we're handling the error code here. Some better way to do this, usually what most people do, they checking not for 200, because if you remember that HTTP can also return 201, 204, those are all success messages. So maybe it makes sense to test something like this. If the status is maybe less than 400, then this is fine. Otherwise, this must be 400 until 500, right? And we're going to get an error with the status code. This will work as well. Very good. So you have two ways of handle errors, and you need to use both of the ways to handle error correctly in XML HTTPRequest. The first is to use the on error, and this happens when some network error occurs. So the HTTP itself failed. Your message didn't got to the other end, or maybe the other end didn't send you the response. Something wrong in the internet connection itself. The other one is when the HTTP was successful, but the status of the HTTP response was an error. It's kind of confusing, I know, but you can look at this like your message has been delivered to the other side, but the other side told you back that there was an error. So this is between you and the API, and the network was successful here. In this case, you need to handle this by using the XHR status code and check what's the status code that we return from the server. And if it's 200, then we can assume that everything's fine and everything works. And this is how you handle errors in XML HTTPRequest. And you're going to have this in your homework as well, so pay attention to this. One last thing I want to show you. I want to show you the XHR MDN webpage. This one, the XML HTTPRequest in MDN. This is a very useful resource, and the MDN is once again very good resource to check out JavaScript information and APIs. And you can read a lot of information about the XML HTTPRequest, including stuff that we didn't cover. For example, there's some state change in the XML HTTPRequest. You can also get the status text, not just the 200. You can get 200 OK. You can set the timeout. A timeout is how many seconds should the XML HTTPRequest wait until it receives a response. And there are many other information and also a lot of events you can get and actions. You can look at these events on load start, on progress. So read this out. If you need any information about XHR, you can read here. They have examples. They have documentation about everything. This is the one last thing that I want you to get from this video. And let's do some recap before we finish up what we learned here today with the XML HTTPRequest. So we learned that XML HTTPRequest is a way to send HTTP requests to APIs using JavaScript. We also learned that to do this, you need to first initiate a new XML HTTP request. You need to specify the onload to event, and then you need to specify the on error to handle errors in the network. And to send the actual request, you need to open it first with the correct URL and HTTP method, and you need to use send. Also, we learned about the two different errors that we need to handle in XML HTTPRequest. The first one is the network error, which we handle here in on error. And the second error is when the API request returns you an HTTP status code of an error status code, which we'll manage here manually by checking the HTTP status in the if here. We also learned a way to parse and get the information from a JSON object by using response type in the XHR or by using json.parse method in the beginning. And we also learned how can we propagate and get actual information here from the JSON from the API. I hope this video was pretty interesting for you and something new. This is a really interesting concept. You can actually now build really small applications that connect to remote APIs and show you some information. Yeah, so thank you for watching this video. Bye.